Good morning, everyone. This is Terry McCann Botel, President of the Iowa Council of Foundations. Thrilled to have you all joining us this morning for a pre-institute webinar in advance of the Lectio Institute later this month. A couple of housekeeping notes. We do have a chat box function on your screen, so please feel free to submit any questions you have there. I do have everyone's line muted for the duration of the webinar, and at the end we'll open up the audio if folks have any questions. And I will go ahead and turn things over to our presenter, Kelly Kolsrud with Lectio. Go ahead, Kelly.
Webinar. You can imagine we're quite eager to work with you all there in Iowa in really just a few short weeks. So as many of you know, in my former role, I actually served as the Campaign for Grade Level Reading State Lead here in Massachusetts, working with both campaign communities and our Department of Education. And much of this Lectio work and our approach derived from 5 years of those efforts with our Massachusetts communities and state-level agencies. And as you'll see, we continue to work with many of these Campaign for Grade Level Reading communities and state agencies today. As you can see here, my colleague and co-founder Noni Lasso, who's on faculty at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I have been partnering in this work for over the past 8 years together, and look forward to working with you as it should be a vibrant, high-impact experience together. As noted in the email that went out, we have a webinar in advance with all participating teams to really share the Institute's design, discuss the information that each team needs to bring to maximize our time together, and really answer any lingering questions that you might have. So again, thanks for joining us, and let's go ahead and jump right in. As you can see here in this brief remote session, I will begin by providing a 360 on our approach to frame the Institute sessions for all teams. I won't go into any real length at this or go into nearly as much detail as provided in the February webinar, but we'll provide just an overview of our approach in general. After the overview, we'll then take a look at the 3-day Institute, what to expect and what you will gain. We'll then move to discussing the minor advanced preparation involved to maximize our learning together. And we'll conclude by sharing a bit of the logistics and provide an opportunity for questions. That said, there will be opportunities throughout the webinar to answer questions or clarify the information shared. So please do feel free to enter your questions in the questions box at any point throughout today's session. So I want to begin with a reminder of the context of which we work in, one that frames much of our approach and one that is, of course, familiar to all of you. That is that across the nation, states, communities, and school districts are increasingly making investments and gaining momentum to offer many programs and services to promote early learning and literacy for all children. It's really unprecedented, something to celebrate, and really to feel heartened by. And as you can see here, it includes a wide variety of programs and services offered in settings including and beyond educational ones. The summer nutrition programs in our community centers, the family education workshops in our libraries, the mobile health clinics, and home visiting efforts, to name a few. And as we look within this national context, we can see the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, where many communities of practice are taking on this critical agenda and making these investments and efforts in a number of different ways. This initiative, as many of you have committed to, uses 3 assurances as a guidepost and organizing our collective efforts around supporting parents, considering health, exploring technology, and prioritizing children in public housing. And using this graphic organizer, which sometimes the campaign calls a bingo card, as a guiding framework, your communities can get a sense of the areas their current efforts support, the partners, and identify issues of coordination and alignment. In taking that closer look within one of these areas, in this case school readiness, for a given community, we might see the family literacy workshops at the WIC centers to support parent education, or the Reach Out and Read program to get books into parent hands, and Abriendo Puertas, which supports Spanish-speaking parents to be their child's first teacher and ensure they are school ready. The community then might have that mobile vision clinic to promote early screening and vision care and to increase access to these critical services. And the community's campaign might include programs targeting families within public housing environments, such as the home visiting program, parent-child home program, or the mobile library utilizing volunteers and supporting children on site. So we necessarily get a sense of programming in this assurance area. We can then imagine if we zoomed in within each area on this framework, marked by those X's, it might look similar or quite different, allowing us to see what areas our initiatives have covered and which areas have not been yet addressed. We can then imagine the same situation in other contexts, funding portfolios, state-level initiatives, where there are priorities of which many programs are supporting, and we can map out what the coverage looks like. These investments in coverage are all guided by this overall goal, nothing new to you all here, of ensuring and promoting high-quality experiences for all, within the home, early education and care settings in schools, and across our communities, including our libraries, churches, museums, and community centers. Yet, we're quite clear that with all of this coverage and promise and activities, those investments in increased programs, as with any campaign or initiative, there are also, of course, potential pitfalls, challenges, and unintended consequences that require a deeper look and analysis. So after several years of research and strategic work with the field, we have landed on 3 key pitfalls to address and ones that we feel are essential to target and the starting point for much of our work. First, there is often a need for more strategic coordination. In many instances, there are inefficient redundancies across the collective effort, confusion among stakeholders and providers, program and initiative fatigue with the potential of different campaigns or initiatives running simultaneously, the reading campaign, the health initiative, or those cradle to career initiatives. And typically, strategic coordination only focuses on coordinating around the ages of children or the settings in which they are served. Rarely is strategic coordination around impact. Next, there is also a need for increased intensity to meet the desired overall goals. Many of our efforts may have the right design, but the implementation lacks sufficient dosage to make measurable impact on behavior change. And some efforts are sufficiently intensive, but we just don't have enough of them at scale. Finally, we focus on the challenge of limited and unclear information on impact. So today, success is often defined by the amount of activities and programs, and we want to remind ourselves that it is necessary but not sufficient for impact. And in many cases, there is limited data as to whether the program or support is having those intended effects on the target population, which is really compromising our effective decisions about scaling. So to help address these common pitfalls and inherent challenges within any collective campaign or initiative, and to really move from coverage to strategic alignment for impact, we support communities and states through an approach that shifts from this coverage and alignment to enhanced impact of the overall early learning and early literacy portfolio. We'll take a brief moment to review and provide an overview of our approach here. So to target these pitfalls and common challenges that emerge with any campaign or initiative, we take an approach that works at 2 levels. The individual program level, to gain a clear understanding about how and why a program leads or does not lead to the intended outcome. And then at the programmatic landscape level, which is really the collective level, which leverages results from the individual program analysis and allows us to identify gaps in programming and or a lack of that strategic coordination around impact across invested programs and services, all to plan and prioritize an even more strategic effort on the collective level, whether that be across a community, state, or district. As we work at these 2 levels, the individual and collective, 3 key areas are central to our approach and ones that guide our 3-day institute. So the research and best practices lay the foundation. Here we move from content-based issues of literacy and early learning, and then move to program design through to more strategic issues of implementation and measurement of impact. We then lead teams through a consultative process that focuses on a landscape analysis and self-study of the programs, services, and potentially instructional strategies within one's initiative or campaign. We employ key processes and tools that, together, will support the analysis on 5 key program dimensions central to results, all that reflect the current research and to help us identify by design what programs will lead or not lead to the intended or expected outcomes. And finally, to maximize those limited resources and attain desired outcomes, we guide teams to consolidate this key data from Lectio tools, evaluate their findings, and engage in strategic planning, prioritization, and action, determining the priority areas to address and making key decisions to move the work forward. And this, of course, is all to ensure increasing impact and maximizing our finite resources, the time, the money, and the human capital. So to that end, as communities or states engage in our approach, a few resulting outcomes occur, a snapshot of which you see here. A clearer articulation of strengths and weaknesses within the collective efforts, whether that is at the community or state level, including gaps in programming. Strategies to identify and evaluate impact at both the programmatic and initiative levels. A shared understanding of the strategies to maximize those resources within programs and across the community or state. An approach to effectively analyze and better identify programming and services that are actually aligned with our community and statewide goals. A more coordinated leadership team that's now driven by an advanced dialogue, key priorities, a process, and a strategic plan. And perhaps one of the most important things is an understanding of those key mechanisms that really underlie program success. How, why, and for whom does this program work for, which really supports our efforts to more effective scaling of those programs and services across our programmatic landscape. So with this approach, we've worked with over 500 partners who sit in over 200 organizations, those who have all committed to addressing these pitfalls, to taking on a strategic approach to overcome them and ensure these efforts and their invested resources are panning out to their intended impact, and ultimately ensuring the success for all children. You can see a snapshot of those partners here, some of which are our colleagues there in Iowa. And we look forward to bringing these examples into our Iowa Institute to really help troubleshoot and discuss barriers to impact in your own settings. These partners include campaigns such as the Read On Arizona campaign with over 25 communities engaged, the Florida Grade Level Reading campaign with over 15 communities invested, the Reading, Pennsylvania Ready, Set, Read campaign, Springfield, Massachusetts Read by Fourth campaign, and campaigns such as your very own Cedar Valley Every Child, Every Day. We've also worked with national organizations such as the AARP's Experience Corps national programming that has models supported within your communities. These partners also include state agencies such as the New Jersey Department of Education, Arizona's Department of Economic Security, as well as their Department of Education. So now that you have a broad understanding of our approach, one that we will return to on day 1 of our Institute, let's move into the overall Institute design. This will give you a sense of what the 3 days will look like with our approach and begin to give you a sense of what to expect. You'll see that the Lectio Institute sits within a cycle of support, one that really reflects the cyclical nature of leading and implementing a change process. So specifically, there are 3 key components to our support. First, of course, the Pre-Institute webinar, of which we are all engaging in today. The 3-day Institute, this, of course, is really the crux of our work that we are outlining throughout this session, and where the core of the work is engaging in the multi-stage impact analysis, which I'll explain in a moment. And then finally, we have this debrief and strategic planning follow-up call, where we provide the opportunity to hold a call with each of your teams to further connect the Institute learnings and work to your team's individual context to further support that advancement toward impact. And we schedule these calls on the final day of the Institute. So let's take a deeper look into the Institute. Here we can see that the Institute objective is to really guide teams through this comprehensive analysis of their campaign or initiatives programs to make certain that their early learning and literacy efforts reach their intended results and that overall campaign goal or initiative goal. To meet this objective across the 3 days, we engage in a multi-stage impact analysis to begin working again at both the individual programmatic level and the programmatic landscape or the collective level. So operationalized here, you can see the 5 phases. On days 1 and 2, we will focus on the individual program analysis, gaining that understanding of how and why each of our programs, for each of your programs, either leads or does not lead to the intended impact. By the middle of day 2, we begin to move into the collective analysis, mapping your programmatic landscape reflective of the individual program analysis results. And this strategic landscape map, again, demonstrates your collective landscape in light of impact versus simply coverage. So it really sets you up for data-driven decision-making with your resources. And therefore, as we move into day 3, we consolidate our data from the Lectio tools to get to a more strategic decision-making and prioritization, as well as to strategic refinement and bolstering, all to target those pitfalls we mentioned earlier and to, again, maximize our resources as well as impact. Again, during our February webinar and one that has been recorded, we went into further detail on how this multi-stage impact analysis looks, so feel free to revisit that recording at any point. So throughout the Institute, we adhere to the principles of adult learning, and it's a really highly interactive learning environment. We move between whole group and team time, and as facilitators, the Lectio team will circulate during team time to really deepen your learning, again, address those individual needs within your team, and better get to know your context, as well, of course, as answer any questions. And you'll see that within the team time, we have an extended independent session each afternoon on days 1 and 2 to really support you working with the day's content and completing items to prepare you for the next day's work. It's really critical and will be provided the last 90 minutes of each Institute day. For many of us across the team, a snapshot of the overall desired outcomes looks something like this. Each of these will be ones of which we will aim to target over the course of our approach. Many of us desire to really engage in the program analysis to really understand how or why our programs lead or does not lead to the intended impact. We're looking to increase that coherence and strategic alignment, again, moving away from just alignment around coverage to really getting around alignment toward impact. We're trying to improve that data collection and analysis of that data. Of course, we're trying to enhance that implementation. We know this is, in many ways, the most critical part of working in any kind of collective campaign is ensuring the implementation actually matches the design of the program and service. We're looking to refine those strategies to maximize those resources, again, time, money, and human capital. And finally, we're really thinking about this scaling idea and trying to identify feasible and realistic plans for scaling programs. So I just want to take a moment as you finalize your Institute preparations and briefly touch upon our team-based approach, particularly given that many of you have secured or are in the midst of securing your teams. As you have heard, we designed the Institute around collective action and change and take this unique team-based approach to the work. As we know, and all too often we've probably engaged in, strategic support or professional learning is really provided to an individual or maybe a couple of individuals. But we really do this work with teams because we know that effective professional learning and real reform means having several key players at the table. As a result, we build a learning community made of teams of these change agents. So as you consider your final team dynamic, here again are just a few items to think about. Of course, there are no hard or fast rules when it comes to putting the right team together for the Lectio Institute. And again, I'm always available to discuss this with you independently if you have questions, especially regarding your specific context or the stage of which your initiative is in. So at a high level, here is the logistical makeup of a team, and I'll share more about the considerations within the team dynamic in just a moment. So teams may range anywhere from 3 to 8 members. So this is, we're really trying to move forward on our efforts and make critical decisions within our current, and again, initiative efforts. So it's more effective and forward-moving when we have more than 2 members at the table. So for communities, potential members might include community leaders, so those people that are leading at nonprofits or library personnel or directors of out-of-school programming. Of course, there might be school district leaders ranging from superintendents to directors of literacy programming or even administrators that are focused on early learning or literacy improvement initiatives. Thinking about those early education and care leaders, community-based directors, and those educators involved in the programming. Of course, thinking about the funders and grant makers that are involved in your initiative, so whether they're sitting at foundations or charitable trusts or coalitions. And finally, policymakers ranging from anywhere from city managers to education agency personnel. So for both our state and community-based teams, here are a few considerations from experience in leading this work. So one consideration when putting your team together is to include members with diverse responsibilities. So try and avoid a team made up of individuals with very similar roles. The more diverse a team is, whether from, again, within a community or state agency or school district or other setting, the more likely there is to be that robust conversation, again, and movement toward measurable change. This includes a team composition of those members who might sit at different levels of the work. So many teams think about having the funder and the grantee at the table. And for many of the same reasons already mentioned, the Institute environment and this analysis process allows partners to really get on the same page quickly around some of the key features to consider on both fronts, from possibly a funding perspective and from a design and implementation perspective. Next, the Institute is designed such that it allows for difficult conversations within a safe and facilitated environment and grounded in a shared language and approach, all focused on strategically prioritizing and planning to maximize the collective effort. So as a result, a consideration is to include those partnerships of which you might be working towards shifting attitudes or behaviors to the work. However, I do want to be clear that this institute is really not 3 days of meetings and breakout sessions. As you saw, it's really based upon moving through that multi-stage impact analysis. So it's robust and intensive, and it's 3 days that really requires all team members to work, fully engaging and actively participating in the sessions. So any of that off-task behavior could really take your team off track to fully maximize the Institute experience. So again, just something to consider as you're thinking about that balance, but also really understanding what the Institute's objective and the day-to-day experience looks like. Another consideration is to really leverage this opportunity to crystallize newly defined or emerging partnerships. And finally, as you've heard probably loud and clear from us and from Becky and Carrie, is the Institute really requires a team leader, a clear team leader. To really move forward on the Institute learnings, we require that a clear leader be in place and one that will lean on throughout the Institute to drive the strategic work, act as a facilitator, and guide the team to decision making. They play a critical role in this process, and of course, they're really supported by us as well. So before saying a few things about the advanced prep and moving into that template that we distributed prior to the webinar, I want to stop here to answer any questions that might have emerged. So if you have a moment and there's something that came up for you, if you want to enter it into that chat box, I can attend to them now.
Kelly, while people take a moment to submit their questions, we did have a question if the slides would be available, and we are recording today's webinar, so we will get that out to participants.
Yes, the slides will be available, and I'll send those obviously after today's session.
And I don't see any other questions right now.
Okay, great. So now let's shift to the advanced preparations. A major contributor to a valuable and beneficial team experience at the Institute is our work involving strategic mapping and planning. So I want to take a few minutes here to share a bit about this minimal amount of advanced prep that will help us get a jump start to that Institute work. So going back to our overall approach, one of the key components of our work is the ongoing landscape analysis and a self-study of the programs, services, and instructional strategies that you might have within your context. We employ those key processes and tools that together will support the analysis on 5 key program dimensions that are central to results. So initially, as you can see highlighted in red, this involves identifying the programs and services that would all be considered early literacy and early learning support as part of that collective and overall community or state effort. These can be focused on children, families, and or adults, including those 2-generation programs. As an example, and to ensure clarity on how we use the term program, because we know there's many different definitions or it's used broadly in many different contexts, here's what it might look like across the different settings. For community-based settings, a program might be that after school or summer programming, the tutoring sessions that you might be running or supporting, and those book drives that you might be investing in. For family or caregiver supports, this might entail those parent workshops or any family engagement activities that might be the breakfast or the literacy nights, or they could potentially be the home visitor visits or early intervention visits that take place. For our school or center-based programs, this includes anything from really diving deep into the instruction, which I'm sure many of us, we might not be involved in for this institute, but something to consider moving forward. But then other programs that are involved in school or center-based are things like the tutoring programs that might be taking place at the schools, or even some of the book buddies or read-aloud programs that might be taking place there as well. And for our state-level leaders, programs might involve the early learning or early literacy grants that you might be investing in, or the funding portfolio that you're implementing, or the professional learning initiatives that you're executing, or those home visiting or early intervention programs, again, that you're supporting. So again, while most of your programs and services will focus on kind of the community-based or the family and caregiver supports or some of that state-level programming, knowing what some of that school or center-based programming options might be helpful as you continue to use this analysis process going forward. To support this advanced mapping and gathering the programmatic landscape, we use a tool, Template 1, of which you received prior to the session, and as you can see here on the screen. So in just a moment, I'm going to walk you through the template and see if you have any questions. As a general note, though, given that this landscape template is to support and capture the programmatic landscape, it therefore means that the teams who benefit the most from the Institute really arrive with an understanding of the programs and services that are offered in their collective effort in which they are working. Again, whether that's the community level, the state level, organizational level, or district. So while a detailed understanding of each program is really not necessary, having a grasp of the programmatic landscape and information documented here will be important to maximize the 3 days together. And again, really getting a running start to that day one. As a team, you can determine the best way and most feasible way to complete this, whether this be the team lead who populates it or the entire team takes some time to work on it together. We will have time on day one to agree upon and confirm the information. However, we will not leave enough time for the entire completion, as we will assume some of this advanced prep has already been done. So let's just take a closer look at this template and ensure we are all on the same page. It's pretty straightforward, but I will briefly walk through each element to clarify and articulate the amount of detail to include to ensure this is a beneficial document for our programmatic analysis during the Institute. So you will likely have much of this information at your ready. So starting with the first column, the literacy program or service or instructional support column, as mentioned on the previous slide, here you would really note the programs or supports that you have within your collective landscape or collective campaign. So those programs invested in and those that will lead and are central to your overall initiative goal. Moving to the setting column, this includes obviously where the actual program or support is being implemented. As you can see, the examples include settings such as the health clinics, the out-of-school setting, the library, etc. Moving to the target population, here you'll want to identify who the program mainly targets. So here we would want to consider the type. So for instance, is the population mothers or children or students or staff, the age, and then specific qualifiers such as children reading below the 50th percentiles or low income or teenage mothers, for instance. So not just thinking about the age and the type, but also some specific qualifiers. Moving to the number served, this includes an estimated number of those served within that targeted population. For program duration, here we want to begin to articulate not only the length of time, but also the frequency. So as you can see in the example, it names the overall duration, which is 4 weeks, and then the frequency and time within each session, which here is 1 hour daily. So we'll really want to capture those two elements, both the duration and the frequency here in this column. For the funding source, this could be a general naming of where the funding source might be coming from, whether it's state or local or federal funding, or you could actually name the funding source or the funding organization here. Moving to the intended outcome, here we are looking for as much clarity and specificity as possible. So we'd really want to ask ourselves, what are we hoping the target population will achieve by the program's end? So oftentimes, partners provide general information here, but the more specificity on what exactly the program is trying to change, specific skills, competencies, or behaviors, the better. And finally, a place for general comments, identifying challenges and successes. So this allows for us to bring these comments and notes to the discussion during the Institute. So let's just take a moment. What would this template look like once it begins to be populated? Here is just an example of one row of the template highlighting one program that you might, again, populate the template with. So you can see in that first column, they've just simply named the literacy program, which is called Talk, Read, Play, and their family workshops. The setting, it's in the Queensville, which is the name of the town, the housing development. The target population, here you can see who it targets in terms of parents and guardians, but a specific qualifier, which is those parent and guardians who have children ages 3 to 5. Then moving to the number served, here we have 15, again, parents or guardians. And the program duration, again, names not only the duration or the length of the program, which is 12 weeks, but really thinking about that frequency of the workshop, which is 1 hour weekly. The funding source has been named as a local family foundation. And here, as we move into the intended outcome, we can see two outcomes of this program, which is one, to support increased parent awareness around early language and literacy, and two, to build parent knowledge around early literacy practices. And finally, in the comments and challenges and successes, I think some of you could probably relate to these challenges, which one is the consistent attendance within the program, and this short-term funding cycle that's a challenge, which is the 1-year grant. On the success side, they're having those that are attending the program are actually sharing positive reactions to the program. So they're getting some feedback from those that are attending the program. So as you can imagine, a community then completes this information for all of those programs of which make up the collective effort, whether that be focused on early literacy or early learning at large. So for our institute, it will be critical to outline the programs that align with your overall initiative goal and those programs that you are investing in. So really thinking about what programs are you committing that time, that money, and that human capital to really ensure that it's all captured and can be taken through the multi-stage impact analysis. So by thoroughly completing this template, it then allows for a real strong launch into that phase 1, where we analyze each one of these programs using our tools to do so. And we're going to start this analysis on day 1 of the Institute, which is why it's important to ensure you come into the Institute having articulated and completed some of that document. So let me just stop here one more time for questions. We'll again stop at the end for a final time, but taking questions around the template itself or how to approach completing it with your team. Again, simply type them into the chat box.
I haven't seen any questions come through, Kelly.
Okay, great. Again, if you have specific questions, please don't hesitate to reach out individually via email. Again, I know we're at different stages of our initiatives and some early stages, some that have been invested for a while and trying to understand what to capture. So I'm more than happy to talk about your specific context, and you'll see my email on the last slide for you to touch base. Great. So again, before we open our session up to any outstanding questions, I just want to quickly review the Institute logistics so we are all on the same page. So the Institute will be held, as we know, from Wednesday, April 25th to Friday, April 27th. Days 1 and 2 will run from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. each day. And day 3 will run from 9 a.m. until 2:30 p.m. On day 1, registration begins at 8:30, which is critical as sessions will promptly begin at 9 a.m. As you can guess, we have quite the full agenda. And as I mentioned, team time will be a critical component of the Institute. So on Wednesday and Thursday, on the 25th and 26th, the last 90 minutes of the Institute is designated as uninterrupted team time. So that means that we're not teaching anymore, and it allows you to process, debrief, and continue working through the day's content and materials with your team. Again, all to ensure that you are prepared and can take full advantage of the next day's sessions. So this time will really be critical to maximize the learning across the 3 days. Each day we will provide between a 45-minute to an hour lunch break at the noon hour. So we'll encourage you to take any calls or get some fresh air during this lunch break. So if there is a call you need to schedule, please make sure and try to have it during that noon hour so that we can ensure that we stay consistent in terms of participation and engagement during the Institute. You can see the location noted, the City Church in Ames with the address there. Parking will be available, and again, thanks to our Ames colleagues for hosting. And on a final note, team member information will need to be sent to Becky by April 17th. And Becky, I'll cue you in if you want to say any few words about this and or other outstanding logistics.
Thanks, Kelly. We're really excited about all the teams that are coming together. And yes, please do send me your full list of team members. We'll need that. And if you use the registration link, it has a question in there specifically about any dietary needs. That's going to be important for our caterer to know. We will also be providing a morning light snack and afternoon and beverages throughout the day. So you can look forward to that as well. And you can either put your information in the registration link that went out earlier, or you can send me that information directly via email. Either way works. Great.
Thanks so much, Becky. As a final summary, coming back to our cycle of support and to remind you of, again, the next steps after the Institute. So once we leave the room on that Friday, you can expect in May and early June that we have this debrief and strategic planning follow-up call. And again, this call really provides opportunity to further connect the Institute learnings, the decisions that you made throughout the Institute, and really work to your team's individual context. So during our Institute, each team will have the opportunity to schedule that follow-up call to further discuss your findings and action steps in light of your specific context. Again, to really continue advancing on your findings and those that emerged from that impact analysis and Institute work. So I just want to take, again, a moment if there's any last-minute lingering questions or ones that emerge even as we cover the logistics. Just take a moment to share those again in the questions box, and we can ensure that we respond to them before we close today's session.
I'll give people a couple moments to respond. I did just want to acknowledge that the Iowa Council of Foundations is pleased to be able to support this training and institute due to funding support from an anonymous donor. So really appreciate the folks who are taking advantage of the opportunity to participate in the Institute here, and the more community members we get engaged, I think the easier it is to take all this great information back home and implement it and work with Kelly's coaching along the way. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to turn it over to Becky for one last comment here.
I did have a question about invoicing, and we can be flexible on how we invoice your team. If it makes sense to invoice individuals, we can certainly do that, and Carrie's team will do that following the Institute. Or if it makes more sense to invoice the full team to one person, we can also do that. So you'll just need to let me know, and we'll make sure that those invoices then go out following the Institute. And just a reminder, if anyone needs support for travel, hotel overnight, we do have our mini grants available. If you're not familiar with those through ICOF, send me a note and we can discuss that in a little bit more detail.
Great. So again, thank you for your time and participation in our webinar today. I again can't say enough about how eager and excited Noni, my colleague, and I are looking forward to working with you on the 25th, 26th, and 27th. And of course, here's my email address there on the screen. If you have lingering questions as you're starting to engage with the template or trying to understand how much to capture, again, please feel free to reach out to me at my email address there. And thanks again, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thanks, Kelly. Take care, everyone.
Great.